This is Adopting Identities, written by This Is Entertaining, read to you by Evening Ruby. Chapter 6. Matt Murdoch froze from his position in front of the stove, turning it off even though his finely honed nose said the chicken wasn't nearly fully cooked. He was much less concerned with the scent of raw chicken, and more interested in the sound of a heartbeat that seemed to encompass an entire marching band. Strong, frequent, powerful, and loud, and also familiar. The slightest slip of a relieved sigh breathed past the man's lips, even as he gingerly moved to don his nightly uniform. His body was still miscolored from the battle 2 nights before, and he was exhausted from preparing for the trial he was going to be doing the next day. He'd been planning to go to sleep the instant he'd eaten, but that plan faded from thought as he slipped on the familiar bodysuit. After all, he'd nearly given up hope of ever hearing that distinct heartbeat again. Spider-Man had disappeared roughly a week and a half prior, without a single web to be seen since. With the way the Daily Bugle stalked the vigilante, Matt was sure that one of the man's villains had proven too powerful. He had been silently mourning the other crime fighter, though they hadn't known each other long, and probably would never have been friends in their normal persons. A sort of kinship had formed between the two, as Spider-Man appeared in Hell's Kitchen seeking guidance. Truthfully, Daredevil had sought him out first, right after the Parker kid had managed to get a picture. The boy had already taken several of Spider-Man, so his interest and paranoia had been piqued until Foggy had given the all-clear on the Parker kid. Of course, by that time, Matt had already spoken to Spider-Man and had gained the younger vigilante yapping on his heels like a puppy. Younger. It rankled Daredevil that for all his abilities and training, that was the best qualifier he could come up with. The other vigilante's heartbeat was too irregular, his body temperature too high. Even his breathing had something off about it, almost irregularly healthy. There was no telltale creaks and groans of muscles, even when the man pulled off the most incredible contortions, but that once again could have been because of his powers. He couldn't get a good enough read. He was clearly not prepubescent, and clearly younger than Foggy and him, but he couldn't narrow it down any further than that colossal gap. Costumed, Daredevil stole up to the roof. His steps were so silent that even he could barely hear them, and the pain that stiffened his muscles earlier faded into the background as he focused on the vigilante on the roof. He didn't think that Spider-Man knew that their usual meeting place was the roof of his home. In fact, he was fairly certain of it, and he intended to keep it that way. Luckily, or not luck so much as countless trips to the roof to oil the hinges, the door slipped open silently and closed just as quietly. On the roof he paused, the feel and sound of the air revealing the other vigilante to be sitting on the edge of the roof, swinging his legs. Yet, it was the scent the softly flowing wind brought that interested Daredevil more than anything. It was Spider-Man, he was certain. The smell of spandex, sweat, and unnatural scent of webbing assured him of that, but Spider-Man had always smelled of bargain shampoo, soap, and clean laundry detergent and subpar cafeteria food. Occasionally he would have the scent of chemicals as though from a lab. Recently, he would have the scent of secondhand smoke. That wasn't what he smelled like anymore. No, he smelled of fresh, healthy food filled with foreign expensive spices, motor oil, and the scent of an engineering lab, and the type of shampoo that only the richest of clients at Landerman and Zack used. Daredevil frowned. He was due for one powerful explanation. "You're here early," he broke the silence, rewarded by a loud yelp as the boy nearly startled off the building.
"What? Oh, you too. I thought I'd have to wait until nightfall for you to show up."
"I
heard that you were here and assumed that you wanted to meet. Ew, Whoa! Do you have spies all over the city? The Daredevil Squad? No. The Hell's Kitchen Irregulars? Wait, that doesn't work. It's supposed to be a street name. What street is this?
Daredevil rose an eyebrow. The cowl hid the motion, but Spider-Man seemed to catch it all the same because he immediately deflated. "Sorry," he nearly mumbled. "I'm a little stressed." The lawyer in him wanted to discuss it, play the charismatic good cop and squeeze all the information he could out of the young man, but he wasn't Matt Murdock right now. He was Daredevil, and he did things differently. Daredevil wasn't smooth words and calm but probing questions. He was blunt and brute. That didn't mean he didn't know how to play a conversation like a violin. "You haven't been seen a while," he said frankly, not commenting on the other vigilante's confession. "Yeah," Spider-Man let out a heavy, sputtering sigh. "I guess that's kind of part of it." Daredevil said nothing, not moving, barely breathing. Barely a moment of silence passed before Spider-Man began pacing, one hand going to rub the back of his neck. My living situation has kinda changed a lot." "I'll say," Daredevil thought, as the motions brought another whiff of insanely priced hair products to his sensitive nose. Still, he didn't say that. Spider-Man, for all he seemed immature, was insanely smart. He liked correcting false statements, loved finding and sharing the truth. Knowing this, "I'm not in the position to be handing out loans if that's what this meeting is about." No, the boy yelled, just as Matt knew he would. "That is not the problem. Actually, that's kind of the exact opposite of my problem." Then, to Daredevil's surprise, Spider-Man left it at that. Spider-Man never gave so little details. Vague just wasn't in his vocabulary, unless, of course, it was related to his secret identity. Daredevil continued to stare at the boy, curiously, an uneasiness whirring in his stomach as he thought through his next course of action. He shouldn't have bothered. Almost immediately, Spider-Man groaned, fiddling with his web-shooting devices in nervous agitation. "I was approached by some people as my normal self, and I thought they were going to use me because I'm me, like Spider-Man. And so I agreed because it seemed cool that Spider-Man would get to work with these people. But it turns out they have no interest in Spider-Man and don't know I'm me, and so they're using me for me as in civilian me, and it turns out they're using me for a different reason, and I don't really know if I would have agreed if I had known they wanted me, and not Spider-Man me. Like, if there wasn't Spider-Man me, then me would have definitely agreed. But I'm Spider-Man, not just me, so I don't know that I should have said yes, but now I can't back out because they would want to know why, and it would be, insane to not want this, at least for anyone other than Spider-Man. But I am Spider-Man. But with them nearby, it's going to be so much harder to be Spider-Man because they're going to be a lot better at catching me, so I can't be Spider-Man, but I am Spider-Man." The boy paused for a moment, breathing deeply as Matt attempted to untangle the young man's frantic rambling. Hell's Kitchen's vigilante tensed as the dots connected. The kid had practically revealed everything. To be fair, it was possible that someone else wouldn't have realized it. Perhaps it would have been vague to someone who couldn't smell the expensive food and toiletries. Perhaps it would have been undecipherable to someone who couldn't recognize the scent of an engineering lab. But Spider-Man hadn't gone to someone like that. He'd sought out Daredevil, who put the sense of science and rich together with the idea of someone who might be interested in Spider-Man, and came to one conclusion: Tony Stark. It was simple after that. The boy had come into contact with Tony Stark, probably in the form of a job or internship offer, and had accepted thinking that the offer was a front door for getting Spider-Man into the Avengers. Instead, the man simply wanted Spider-Man's civilian self. Understandable. The boy really was incredibly smart. Now Spider-Man was concerned about his secret identity.
Still, the young man clearly wanted privacy, and Daredevil could respect that. Besides, what had happened wasn't nearly as important as what was going to happen.
Are you hanging up the cape?
No capes, Spider-Man replied immediately, his voice high and harsh to imitate the cartoon character. Yet another reason why the vigilante was convinced the other vigilante was younger. Never mind the fact that Foggy had said the same exact thing a week ago when he'd used the phrase. Sorry, Spider-Man coughed, his heartbeat rising as he blushes in embarrassment. I mean, yes. For a while at least. I have some ideas to help hide my identity better, but it's going to be a while before I can actually start working on them. He shifted to his feet. Do you think you could just maybe keep an eye out for my area of New York until I get back? Just make sure it's not going too crazy.
I don't work in daylight, he responded, knowing that the other would understand it as an agreement to keep an eye out at night. Just as he expected, the boy sighed in relief. Thanks, and thanks for listening. I haven't been able to really process any of this stuff for a few days. It was nice to talk it out.
Matt nodded, silently wondering when he became a counselor for a spider-themed vigilante. Hey, the boy suddenly perked. This was the last day I'll be able to do this for a while. I think it's dark enough to go out and find some mobster to bring down or something. He had no clue, actually. Still, it was easy to deflect that one.
That doesn't sound smart. If Spider-Man disappears when these people approach you, then appears only tonight to disappear again, it may...
The boy groans loudly. Yeah, they'd figure it out. This sucks, he sighs. What if we were really subtle about it?
Spider-Man.
Yeah, I know, but the thing is, if he disappears the day the day we met, they might figure it out anyway. Daredevil bit back a sigh before it could sneak out. That was true.
He had to fight to keep a grimace from crossing his features.
He really didn't want to do this, but the kid would have done it for him. They'd had each other's backs too often for him to be able to just turn the other vigilante away in its time of need. He was going to regret this.
You have another suit?
Oh, not really, the boy answered, his heart rate kicking up in surprise and confusion. I mean, not yet. I'm probably gonna work on a new one now that I have the money, I guess. Maybe make some improvements?
The boy's voice trailed off for a moment as he clearly began to consider plans for what he could do with the new resources at his disposal. After a moment of silence, the boy physically shook himself out of his thoughts.
Why?
Leave it in the alley before you go. Make sure they see you around at nights for the next few days. I'm not going to do this for long.
He was going to regret this so much, but at least if Daredevil laid low for a few days, it might get Foggy to relax a little. Though he had no clue how his best friend would react if he found out our Matt was fighting crime in whatever Spider-Man was wearing. Wait, you're gonna... Really?
Don't make me regret it.
The younger man let out a shrill screech and launched himself at Daredevil, wrapping the tense man in a hug for a millisecond before jumping away. Oh, sorry, thank you so much. Unsure how to respond to such overt gratitude, Matt simply nodded awkwardly, knowing his cowl would make it seem much more confident, and turned to leave the roof. He waited until the strong heartbeat of the other vigilante had faded into the sound of the city before moving to get the suit. He wasn't looking forward to being Spider-Man, but he figured the kid needed all the help he could get.
Peter stopped, shrugging his shoulders in an attempt to fix his backpack straps onto his slim shoulders without letting go of the many bundles of flowers in his arms. It didn't work, and he was left entering the cemetery with straps sticking into the crook of his elbows. He'd taken care of the living, asking Daredevil to watch over the city, visiting the library to research the average 15-year-old's strength and stamina, and getting one last fry at the restaurant where he and Gwen used to hang out. Now it was time to pay his respects to the dead. He fell to his knees in front of Gwen's headstone, the bundles slipping out of suddenly weak arms. "Gwen," he laughed wetly, staring at the memorial to the only one who knew both sides of who he was. He laid the bundle of roses softly beside the stone. "Gwen, you wouldn't believe what I got myself into this time." He talked for what felt like forever, finally able to bridge the gap between his two identities and speak about Peter's insecurities alongside Spider-Man's fears. He could explain the confusing distress and pride that arrived when he realized they wanted him for him, not for his powers, but his intelligence. He complained about the corner of his room that was just begging for a web hammock that he could never put up. He talked and talked until his hoarse voice finally petered out. Finally, he let out a shuddering sigh and ran his hand over the top of the gravestone and began collecting the other flowers. "Love you," he mumbled, an insanely smart, funny, beautiful blonde in his mind's eye. His heart grew steadily heavier as he walked through the cemetery to the once small plot that had grown far too large in recent years. He breathed deeply as he laid down a bouquet of flowers beside each of the 4 graves. He still couldn't bring himself to tell them who he was, what he'd done and become. He still couldn't bring up the name Spider-Man. That's okay. Peter Parker had plenty to say. He walked around the 4 gravestones, laying a bundle at each foot of the stone as he greeted them. "Hey, Mom, Dad, Uncle Ben, Aunt May." His voice finally cracked on the last one. It was too recent. They all were, really. But she died on his watch. Spider-Man had been right there, helping people, saving them from accidents, rushing them to the hospital. He hadn't been able to help fight whoever the Avengers had been battling, but he'd done what he could to help the others. He hadn't made it in time to save Aunt May. He'd found her, but too late. She died in his arms as he screamed for the paramedics scrambling around the rubble to hurry. She died with her eyes unfocused and Peter's name on her lips, though she never knew that her head was in her child's lap. A sob sneaked out of Peter's mouth as the moment flashed past his mind vividly. I miss you guys." For a long moment, the only sound in the cemetery was the boy's heavy breathing as he struggled to control himself. He hasn't been to the cemetery since Aunt May's funeral, a cheap affair attended by dozens of people who had loved her. I'm sorry I haven't been here a lot. It's been kinda, yeah." He laughed wetly, unsure of how to continue. "It's been, what, busy?" Yes, he'd been running himself ragged every night before the Avengers as Spider-Man, terrified of stopping and thinking and remembering. Stressful? Yeah. He'd spent the last week and a half in an intense address the public boot camp that had had him scared to say the word hi, lest it somehow lead to the end of the world. Hard? Yeah. He couldn't kid himself. He could have made time if he'd tried, if he'd wanted to. He hadn't. He couldn't see another person he loved reduced to a single sentence on a stone. He couldn't see the 4th marker of loss and know who lay beyond it, know why she lay there. Guilt and grief rose together, making his hands shake as he stood over the shells of those he loved. He hadn't been strong enough before, but the Avengers were helping. Just being around them was helping, making him feel more grounded, more stable. It didn't hurt that this was probably going to be the last day he would be able to visit them without a bodyguard of some kind. For a while, at least. He took a deep breath as he sat cross-legged on the grass. You guys wouldn't believe what's happening here right now. The Parker luck, I guess. I got abducted by the Avengers. Yeah, all of them. They were looking for someone whose parents died in Avengers fights, and they were really impressed with me. Especially Mr. Stark. I guess I take after you guys a lot. He turned to his parents with a smile before looking at his aunt and uncle. And it looks like all of those elaborate science fair projects really paid off, I guess. He trailed off for a moment before hesitantly describing the men he lived with. So alike and so different from the heroes on TV. He spoke specifically to Uncle Ben, remembering the man's excitement and admiration for the heroes who saved the world from aliens in the scenes before his death. He spoke long past when his voice started becoming rough, until an alarm on his phone reminded him that he had to be back at the tower soon. He sighed and straightened the flowers on the gravestones. Love you. He stood, wiping the dirt and bits of grass off from his pants that probably cost more than all of his wardrobe put together. He was unsurprised when the slightest tingling of spider sense drew his eyes to a single figure sitting comfortably on a stone bench by the path. Sam, he greeted, shuffling up to the man while pulling up his backpack. Peter? Sam nodded, scooting over an inch on the uncomfortable bench. Taking the invitation, Peter sat next to the man. So, was I alone for any part of today? He was. He knew he was. There was no way Sam would be sitting here this comfortably if they found out he was Spider-Man. Still, he couldn't help the thrill of fear at the question. Sam, however, simply nodded. Most of the day, actually. Trust me, Nat's ticked about it. A smile flitted across Peter's mouth. I knew she was following me, but I never actually saw her, so I had no clue if I'd managed to lose her. Without his spider sense, he never would have known. You're about to get some fun one-on-one time with the Black Widow this week. Great, he said weakly, before perking up. Sure, it would be hard work, but he would be training with the Black Widow. How amazing was that? Wait, really? The man smirked. See if you're that excited after your first session. Peter chuckled, but the sound soon faded. So, if she didn't follow me, how did you find me? I knew you'd be here. Oh. Once again, silence. The two heroes sat side by side, their breathing scarcely heard as they were surrounded by the deafening silence only a cemetery can achieve. Sam's entire posture was relaxed. He wasn't even looking at Peter, instead gazing serenely out at the rock-strewn field. Peter could ask to leave at any moment, or he could invite Sam to see his family. The choice was Peter's. Sam wouldn't judge him either way. Maybe that's why the choice was so easy to make. Do you want to meet them? I'd be honored. The boy led the man through the pathways, walking over well-trampled grass to the row of 4 stones. Mom, Dad, Aunt May, Uncle Ben? This is Sam Wilson, Falcon, but I guess only you would know what that means, Aunt May. Sam glanced at Peter out of the corner of his eyes, but the boy was looking at the ground, so he knelt beside the nearest stone, Benjamin Parker. You raised an amazing boy. If you could see him now, you'd be proud. Heck, I'm sure you're proud already. We'll take good care of him. I promise. With that, he gave a moment of silence head bowed, before he rose in a fluid motion and clapped Peter on the shoulder. The two left in silence, each trapped in their own thoughts. Finally, when they were nearly to the steps of the tower, and the atmosphere of the cemetery had nearly completely melted away, Sam spoke. "You ready for the press conference tomorrow?" "Not really," the boy admitted with a cringe. "Good." He ruffled the teen's hair, ignoring Peter's indignant squawk. "If you said yes, I'd have marched you to one of those fancy head doctors Tony keeps around to check us for concussions.